Walk into an eyewear store and you might see Ray-Ban, Oakley, Persol, Prada, Chanel, and Armani. It looks like a wall of different brands competing for your attention. But some of those brands belong to EssilorLuxottica. Others are independent fashion brands whose eyewear is produced under licensing agreements. And that distinction is where the real story begins. You may have heard the claim that Luxottica controls 80% of the eyewear market. But that figure is difficult to define, and it is not a verified measurement of every pair of glasses sold worldwide. So what is actually true? How did one company become involved in frames, lenses, brands, distribution, retail, and vision care? And is EssilorLuxottica really a monopoly? Or is it a powerful, vertically integrated company operating across several different markets? Before we talk about market power, we need to separate the word eyewear into several different businesses. There are frames, prescription lenses, sunglasses, brand licensing, manufacturing, wholesale distribution, optical laboratories, retail stores, online sellers, and vision benefit companies. These businesses are connected, but they are not one single market. That matters because a company can be extremely powerful in one part of the chain without controlling the entire industry. Luxottica began as an Italian eyewear manufacturer, but it did not remain only a manufacturer. In 1995, Luxottica acquired the United States Shoe Corporation, the parent company of LensCrafters. That gave Luxottica direct access to a major optical retail chain. In 1999, it acquired Ray-Ban from Bosch and Lomb. In 2001, it acquired Sunglass Hut. And in 2007, it acquired Oakley for approximately $2.1 billion. The pattern is important. Luxottica was expanding in two directions at once. It was moving backward into production and forward into brands and retail. If you only manufacture frames, you depend on other companies to distribute and sell them. But if you also control brands and retail stores, you can participate in more stages between the factory and the customer. That does not automatically make the business illegal, but it does create a much broader form of influence than a standalone frame manufacturer would have. Now look again at that wall of eyewear. Ray-Ban, Oakley, Persol, Oliver Peoples, and Vogue Eyewear are examples of proprietary brands in EssilorLuxottica's portfolio. But Prada, Chanel, Burberry, Tiffany, and Versace are different. EssilorLuxottica produces eyewear for those labels through licensing agreements. That means it has contractual permission to design, manufacture, or distribute eyewear under those brand names. It does not mean EssilorLuxottica owns the entire fashion company behind every label. So the accurate claim is not that one company owns every famous eyewear brand. The accurate claim is that EssilorLuxottica owns several major eyewear brands and also manufactures or distributes eyewear for many major fashion labels. That is a very different statement, but it is still a significant one. Then came the move that connected the other major part of the industry. In 2018, Essilor and Luxottica combined. Essilor was a leading designer and manufacturer of ophthalmic lenses and wholesale optical laboratory services. Luxottica was a leading designer, manufacturer, and distributor of optical frames and sunglasses, as well as a major optical retailer. The merger connected two complementary parts of the eyewear supply chain. The resulting company became active in lens development and manufacturing, frame design and production, branded eyewear, wholesale distribution, and optical retail. This is what vertical integration means in this context. It does not mean that one company makes every pair of glasses from beginning to end. It means that the same corporate group operates at multiple stages of the value chain. The potential benefit is efficiency. The concern is leverage. Can a company that supplies products to independent retailers also favor its own stores? Can it influence wholesale terms? Can it make the market harder for smaller competitors to enter? Those were the kinds of questions regulators examined. But here is where the popular story needs correcting. The claim is not simply that Luxottica owns 80% of all glasses. That figure has been used in different ways to describe major brands, premium eyewear, sunglasses, or broader industry influence. Snopes concluded that Luxottica clearly owns or controls major brands and retailers, but that the 80% figure for the entire eyewear market was undetermined. Snopes also discussed older market data in which Luxottica's reported frame production represented less than 10% of frames sold worldwide. But that was a historical production comparison. It was not a current measurement of the group's total influence. So the 80% statistic should not be presented as a verified current market share for the entire global eyewear industry. The Federal Trade Commission investigated the 2018 Essilor and Luxottica merger. The FTC said its staff conducted an extensive, year-long investigation. It reviewed more than 1 million documents, interviewed more than 100 market participants, and examined possible problems involving vertical foreclosure, potential competition, and retail competition. The FTC ultimately closed the investigation without concluding that the proposed merger violated United States antitrust law. The agency also said Luxottica's national share of United States optical retail was below 10% at the time. That figure is important, but it needs to be described correctly. It referred to United States optical retail. It did not mean that Luxottica had less than 10% of the entire global eyewear industry. And it did not mean that the FTC concluded the company had no market power. It meant that, based on the evidence available at the time, the agency did not believe the merger was likely to substantially reduce competition under United States antitrust law. Those are not the same thing. A company can be large, influential, and vertically integrated without legally being classified as a monopoly. The later GrandVision acquisition shows why the details matter. At the time of the transaction, GrandVision operated more than 7,000 optical stores in more than 40 countries. The European Commission approved EssilorLuxottica's acquisition of GrandVision, but only subject to commitments. The Commission examined concerns involving the relationship between wholesale supply and optical retail. In other words, the concern was not simply how many stores the combined company would own. It was also whether a major supplier could use its position to disadvantage competing optical retailers. The approval, therefore, included remedies and store divestitures in certain markets. This does not prove that EssilorLuxottica is a literal monopoly, but it does show that regulators considered the combination of supplier power and retail ownership important enough to require safeguards in specific markets. There are legitimate arguments on both sides. Critics argue that a large portfolio of familiar brands can create the appearance of competition while concentrating production and distribution behind the scenes. They also argue that vertical integration can give the company more influence over pricing, shelf space, and access to retailers. The counterargument is that consumers still have alternatives. There are independent opticians, online retailers, Costco, Walmart, competing frame manufacturers, competing lens companies, and lower-priced brands. The company also argues that scale can support research, improve logistics, fund innovation, and make product launches more efficient. So the evidence does not support saying that one corporation literally owns every pair of glasses. But it does support saying that EssilorLuxottica has built an unusually broad position across the eyewear value chain. The real story is not that every pair of glasses comes from one factory. The real story is that one corporate group can operate in several roles. As a brand owner, as a licensee, as a frame manufacturer, as a lens producer, as a wholesaler, as a retailer, and at the time of the FTC's review, as a major participant in managed vision care. That is why the company can feel much larger than any single market share number suggests. So is EssilorLuxottica a literal monopoly? The evidence does not support saying that it owns 80% of every eyewear product sold worldwide. The more accurate description is that EssilorLuxottica is a highly integrated market leader with significant positions across brands, frames, lenses, wholesale distribution, and retail. The important question is not whether one company makes every pair of glasses. The important question is how much influence one company can exercise when it operates across so many layers of the supply chain. The next time you compare glasses, do not just compare the logo on the frame. Ask who designed it, who made it, who supplied the lenses, and who owns the store selling it. Which industry should we investigate next?